My name is Justin. I get to serve as the teaching pastor. I'm so glad that you are all here. This is a neat time that we get to gather, and there are those of you that are with us online, and we're very excited that you're in the room with us that way as well. And we're continuing and keeping rolling with our series, The King Revealed. And what we're doing in this series, and we'll be in it for a bit, but we're looking at the life of Jesus, and we're looking at his identity as we go, as that his identity as the King of all kings is revealed throughout the whole story of the Bible. And we want to, along the way, explore what it means to grow a relationship with him. That's what we're looking at. That's what you're doing, and that's what we're doing. And I want to start with a question today. And as I ask this, you think about this. Do you ever feel like you run out of time for the most important things in your life? I got to ask you a different way. You ever feel like you have enough time? Ain't nobody have enough time, right? So I bring that up to say this. Years ago, decades ago, many, many years ago, the prediction was that computers and technology were supposed to create more time for us. By increasing our, look at this beauty, right? By increasing our, this is my laptop, by increasing our ability to get things done faster. We're supposed to gain more efficiency. And with all of this extra time that we're going to have, we would be able to put it to better use with leisure and this work-life utopia. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, these are some interesting predictions. You determine if they've come true or not. In 1966, Time magazine predicted that computers would be filling the roles of all but high-level executives, leaving 90% of the world to enjoy a state of leisure. And they said this would take place by the year 2000. Well, I'm telling you this. I got a job at Kentucky Fried Chicken in about 2002, 2003. And do you know how many robots I worked with? Absolutely none. I was frying all the chicken. You know what I mean? It wasn't that way. And I got a job after that. In 1967, the Senate subcommittee convened, and they said that the average American would work about 22 hours a week and only 27 weeks a year. By the year, 1985. It isn't your reality. It's not mine either. Now, I will say this. Technology did get a whole lot better. For example, the average smartphone has the computational power and resources of all of NASA's 1969 operations that put people on the moon, right? In your pocket. It's a lot of power. But I will say, categorically, it has not fixed our time problem. And you can maybe relate to this, right? All computers have done is increase productivity to the point where there is this ever-present tyranny of the urgent. We can get a whole lot more done, so we should get a whole lot more done. But it never stops. Everything's happening so fast. There's always the next thing that has to happen right now. Everything is urgent. More pressure to make the most of every single moment. If I can get more done, I should get more done. It's always urgent. Does that resonate with you? You got it? Okay, so for me, and this is maybe something else you can relate to, because this is the challenge that I feel like I face, and this is the tension for me. I feel like I'm sometimes running too fast. I feel like I'm running out of margin, and I'm running out of bandwidth. I'm going from task to task, or meeting to meeting, or project to project, and you know what I feel like I run out of time for a lot? People. I run out of time for people. And the tension that I experience is that I really do. I want to love people well. Like I want to care for and value people well. Like I want to express compassion for people. I want to be like Jesus in that way. But I'm in too much, if I'm honest, I'm in too much of a rush to see the needs around me. Like I run out of the store, and there's needs, and I see them, or I'm not even aware of them. Or maybe you can relate to this. You're in conversation with somebody, and you realize they've been talking to you, and it's got to a level of depth, but you don't know what you've been thinking about the next thing you're going to do. You ever been there? And for me, it's like I get hit in the face with that, and I realize I feel like I'm running out of time and all this kind of stuff, but I want to love people well. That's the tension I experience. But as I've been thinking about this, here's the thing. I don't think it's really a time issue. I think it's really a heart issue. Here's why I think that. Because if anyone could have cited a time issue, it was Jesus. In about 3 years, he had the most, if anyone could have said, I don't have time for that, it was Jesus, but he never operated that way. He was doing the most important work, the most important mission, heading for those 3 years to go to the cross, and the important work of preparing people to advance the kingdom of God while he was gone, after he was left. See what I'm saying? It's like he only had 3 years to do that. He never cited time as an issue. He always had time. He faced the tyranny of the urgent very differently than you and I do. People were his priority. His capacity for compassion seemed endless. He was the king of compassion. Let's just give him that title. Talking about the king revealed, let's just call him that. And yet, people were around him constantly, all the time, and they needed help. They needed help. So, for me, thinking about your life for a moment, for us, how do you feel when someone knocks on the door? If it's during the day, I'll confess this to you, I get annoyed, frustrated. Like I'm sitting there, I'm like, what are you doing knocking on my door? It's the middle of the day, I'm not doing anything, but now I have to stop doing nothing to go answer the door. And if it's after night, if it's Christmas, maybe it's carolers, but if it's after night, it's like, oh my goodness, this is a murderer. You know what I mean? We don't respond well to those interruptions in life. But Jesus, there's a story in Mark 1 where people just showed up. It was after dark, and they showed up to where he was staying. And not just some people, the whole town and village showed up at his door for him to heal them and cast out demons. And you know what? He did it. He didn't say, come back in the morning. So I love the king of compassion and getting to see that. So that's what I want us to look at today as we're looking at the king revealed. So we're going to go through a narrative today. And we're going to ask two questions along the way. First is this: what are the qualities of Jesus' compassion? What was it like? And secondly, how do we respond to the king of compassion? You ready for this? You ready to jump in? Awesome. We're going to be in Mark 5. The verses will be up here. If you've got YouVersion or your Bible, feel free to follow along. But we're going to start in Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verse 22. And let me give you the context before we launch right in. Here it is. So Jesus had just healed a demon-possessed man. And this demon-possessed man, he lived a life of isolation and homelessness, and the people in his community could do nothing to help him. And then Jesus shows up on the scene, and he heals this man and restores this man right before the story we're going to look at. He heals this man. And for that tremendous power and effort, you know how the community of people responded? They kicked Jesus out. They asked him to leave. And there may be multiple reasons. One of the reasons, I think, is they were afraid of his power. So Jesus honors that request. He gets in the boat and leaves and goes across the sea to the other side of the shore. And then he touches down there. And immediately as he gets there, we get into this scene right here. This is our narrative for today. Mark 5:22. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came when he saw Jesus. So this is a main character. This is one of a couple main characters we're going to look at today. So who's Jairus? Well, we see he's one of the synagogue leaders. What's that exactly mean? So if you were just meeting Jairus, you would probably lump him into the same category of scribes and Pharisees and teachers of the law. That's kind of how you would probably lump him, all right? In fact, it was people like Jairus. If you were here last week, it was people like Jairus who would criticize Jesus for eating with sinners, people that were deemed unclean, tax collectors. It was people like Jairus that opposed Jesus at just about every opportunity. And the other thing we know, because he's a synagogue leader, I think some implications or some presuppositions we can make. He probably had high social standing, a little more on the upper class. He probably had some financial means. This would have made him in charge of the physical management of the synagogue, which was the center of life for the Jewish community then. He's probably maybe responsible for the flow of the worship services. If you're looking at Jairus in that community, he's a high-level guy. And he's likely an expert in being religious. The traditions and customs, he's got those down. So All that in the character of this guy, and he is coming at Jesus. And the question is, what is a man like this? How will he respond to Jesus? This is a question. And let's see. Here's what it says. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him. And this is the desperation. You can hear it as a dad. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and lived. Now this request is coming from somebody who had, I don't know Jairus' exact story, but people like Jairus had opposed Jesus. But in moments of desperation, the things that you're willing to lose, the things you're willing to put at risk, have you been there? Do you know what that's like? Jairus in this moment was willing to let go of reputation and influence and position and status. He broke with party lines and power dynamics. There are moments of desperation so intense that everything feels like it's on the table, where you just stop pretending and you are real. And this is Jairus' moment. When you get desperate enough, that's where you go. So this is one of the things I see in this story that's really significant. And we see it a couple times. Jairus recognized his desperate need and threw himself at Jesus' feet. He came to an awareness of it. He let go of the religiosity and he moved, even in a small way, in a desperate way, into a relationship. He let go of pride and he humbled himself. And this is why I think this is so critical, because I think there's an awareness. When we're aware of our own need, it produces humility in us, and that softens our heart towards the other people we encounter. Otherwise, if we think we have no need, we approach other people, and in some way we feel maybe superior to them. But what we see in Jairus here, I think it's neat. He's got a humility. He lets go of that pride. He throws himself down. Here's a leader of a synagogue throwing himself down at the feet of Jesus. And it's kind of ironic when you think about the scene. Jairus is face down, bowing in humility, hoping to receive from Jesus the same compassion that people like Jairus had condemned Jesus for giving out. Do you see that? So how's Jesus going to respond? And this is why he's the king of compassion. I want you to see this. If nothing else, let Jesus be elevated this morning. Jesus went with him. He went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him, and it's like the ambulance is off. The rescue mission is underway. Because his little girl's dying, he's got to get there in enough time, right? And Jesus stepped over so many offenses. People in the past, the question his character or his authority, and people that were on Jairus' side of the street even opposed his mission because they made it hard for people to come to him because they tried to ask him questions and cast doubt. And the other thing that I think about for Jesus didn't, this is what I believe about Jesus' power, he didn't need to be in the room to do anything. He could have just said a word. So it's really compassionate and significant that this is an interruption, and Jesus goes with him. Right? It's very significant to me. He made time for him. That's the compassion of Jesus. Jesus responded with compassion. So what do I mean by compassion? It's like I want to give us like a working definition this morning. So hold on to this. Think through this lens. Compassion means you feel another person's need like it was yours, and it moves you to action. You feel another person's need like it was yours, and it moves you to action. That's why I think this is not a time issue, it's a heart issue. That's what I think. So, the rescue mission is underway, and yet along the way, there is another interruption. Verse 25, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So she's got suffering. It's layered suffering, y'all. 12 years of physical suffering. The bleeding for 12 years. Now, in that kind of time frame, understand too, when it's Jewish custom, somebody like her would have been seen by the rest of the community as unclean for a long time. So I don't know, I would imagine there's some emotional suffering. She's been in the shadows. She might be isolated and ostracized. The text doesn't tell us anything about a husband, so I don't know. Maybe if she had one, he was long gone by this point. I don't know. So there's physical suffering, there's emotional suffering, and then on top of that, the text says she spent all she had. So there's a level of poverty here. She's got nothing. You know what I mean? Like suffering physically, emotionally, financially. She's desperate. And that, I think, is what makes Jairus and this woman, though they are in completely different sides of the social system, they're in the same boat. Now, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. So she is wanting it says a lot about how she must see herself. I think she's experiencing some shame. She wants to sneak in and she wants to sneak out. And she has no more hope. He is her last hope. And I'm just asking you, can you imagine what that's like? Have you been there yourself? So she touches his cloak, and this is the outcome of this. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. Now this is powerful on a number of levels. Just for the facts of the matter, she's healed. Wow, the power of Jesus, just by touching his cloak. But on top of that, I want you to be encouraged, because this woman, I don't know what she believes about Jesus. I don't know how strong her faith is. She was trying to touch his cloak, not have a conversation with him. I don't know what her theology is like, but the encouragement is she takes a small next step towards Jesus, and he shows up. She comes out of the shadows just a little bit, and he shows up with his compassion. So that's an encouragement, because I don't know where you're at, and you may not be sure of who he is, but I'm going to invite you to take just that small step. Now, how's Jesus going to respond to this? At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. And he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" It is kind of funny. You can laugh. It's totally fine. Because you're not the only ones that think that's kind of a funny question, like, who touched my clothes? Because the disciples are looking at this crowd of people, and they say the same thing. In verse 31, "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" I mean, imagine you're in a mosh pit. And it's like, "Somebody touched me." You know what I mean? Like, yeah, so they're maybe a little bit incredulous. Because the thought process, like, everybody's touching you. And maybe in the back of their minds, they're thinking, we got to get going. This guy's daughter. Because that's tension. Because while Jairus and his daughter kept waiting, here's what Jesus does. He doubles down. While Jairus and his daughter kept waiting, Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. So he stops. So ask yourself this: what's Jairus thinking at this point? What's that tension like? It's understand if you'd think like, how, if you're in his shoes, maybe you'd be thinking, how is any of this more important than what we're going to do? How is this more important than my daughter's life at this point? That's the heart of a father, and desperation. I get it. And what I see on display here in this moment, oh, this is so powerful. It's Jesus responding with compassion, and here's what his compassion looks like. Interruptions are invitations for compassion. You see it with Jairus, and you see it in a very visible way here with this woman. Interruptions are invitations for compassion. This is Jesus. People are greater than projects. People were never inconveniences. They were the mission. Every interruption is invitation and opportunity. He always had a good attitude. So this is my challenge. This is my question. Consider this. What interruptions do you need to see as invitations? What needs have you overheard in the office? They are invitations. Respond. Who just needs you to linger in conversation a little bit longer, though it's not convenient for your time, because they need to know another person cares about them? My friends, those are invitations for compassion. What phone call or text do you need to make to just check in? And doesn't the Holy Spirit always bring that up at the most inconvenient time? That's an invitation. And if you leave to go make a phone call or text, I'll assume that's what you're doing right now. It's excellent. Good obedience. What warning flares has your spouse sent up? Those are not interruptions. They are invitations for compassion. So this is Jesus. Interruptions are invitations for compassion. And because he responded with compassion, this woman's life was changed forever. Not just with the healing, but look at where it goes. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And she's scared. You're thinking, why was she scared? Well, I mean, first of all, she's being singled out in a crowd of people. It's the same thing at church. If we're like, stand up and meet 2 or 3 people that you don't know. And you're like, I'm not going to that church ever again. You know, this was a nice run, but I got to go, right? You know, we don't like that, to be singled out, and then on top of her thinking about all the other tension going on. Well, first of all, he's a rabbi and she was unclean. She touched him. She took power without permission. Maybe there's a fear that he'll take it back. There's a fear of humiliation. And so she comes and she tells him the whole truth, which is courageous and is a small step towards Jesus. And this is what Jesus' response is. And I want you to hear the warmth and the compassion. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And as it turns out, the reason he kept looking for her was so he could say this to her. He didn't want her to just walk away healed, but feeling unknown and unloved. He wanted to bring her in. He wanted a relationship with her. Do you see that? Do you know what's at stake if Jesus doesn't stop? She doesn't experience the transforming grace and love of Jesus. She may walk away the rest of her life thinking and feeling she always took something from him, instead of receiving a free gift from a compassionate king. So Jesus was drawing her out to welcome her in. And then I've just got this thought, and I'll just mention it to you. What's this doing to the heart of Jairus? Here he is trying to get to his daughter, and here Jesus stops and calls this woman daughter. I don't know, just think about that. So the compassion of Jesus is on full display here, and here's what Jesus is doing. Jesus drew her out of the shadows because he wanted a relationship with her. That's what Jesus was doing. That's his compassion. And I'm going to tell you, it's like, I believe he's doing the same thing to you and I today. And for your story, he may be doing the same thing, drawing you out of the shadows into a relationship with him this morning. And maybe your past is a source of shame. Maybe it's something you held on to. Maybe it's a source of guilt. And maybe you're thinking, well, my past was last night or this morning or just last week. It's not really that far in the past to be past. I'm going to say, trust him with everything. Come all the way to him and let him be the one to clean you up. Because Jesus, in this story, he drew her out to welcome her in, and I believe he's doing the same thing to you. What I love, and this is something that I just saw because I think it points to the good news of who Jesus is and what he's done. Jesus gave up his power so that and the woman in this story could be made clean. And I'm telling you, he did the same thing for you and I. He gave up his power on the cross so that we, by no right doing of our own, might have the righteousness of Jesus. He made us clean. He gave up his power. He let go of his crown and he came to earth and he went to the cross and paid for our sin so that the consequences wouldn't be death. He paid the consequences once and for all. It's done. And we don't have to do anything right in order to receive it. We have to trust him and believe in him and go to him, and his righteousness is imputed to us. It's good news. He makes us clean. In the story, he gave up his power for her to make her clean, and he does the same for us. And he called her daughter. And all she did was take a small step out of the shadows and respond to him. And you and I, we are born again and adopted as children of God into his family when we come to faith in Jesus. So will you come to him? Will you step out of the shadows? Will you take the first step, even if you're struggling and not quite sure what you think about him or what you believe yet? Will you just take the first step? Will you be confident? Will you be confident? Go to him confident that your past and your shame and your history don't need to be dealt with before you go to him. Rather, trust him with all of it and let him be the one to take care of it. It's good news, and it's on the table. This is the compassion of Jesus. He's the King of compassion. And this woman gets to see that, and it changes her life. Now, I want to go back to Jairus for a moment, because for him, it would seem that it was actually too late. Because while this scene is happening, and Jairus is there, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and they said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" And if you could just, these are real people. Do you see the juxtaposition? One being told, "Daughter, you're free," and this man who came in desperation saying, "Your daughter is dead." I don't know what that's like. But I wouldn't know how to respond either, but Jesus did. And overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." And you think, like, believe in what? But I believe, what I think is Jesus is drawing Jairus out of the shadows too. He's drawing him into a relationship too. And nothing happens on accident. And I don't know if there was something in that interaction with that woman that Jairus needed to see to have the faith to go where it was going next. I don't know. But they keep moving. And so Jesus, it says, Jesus did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John. And so Jesus had these 12 disciples. They were a small group, if you would think about it that way. But of that small group, there was like a micro group of 3 that were his closest confidants, like an inner circle. Peter, James, and John, that was them. So they get to go with Jesus forward. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. This was actually Jewish custom. They would hire professional wailers. So to me, it means Jairus is some kind of man of means. But he went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. And you know what Jesus does? He steps right over that offense. That's Jesus' compassion. It was personally costly, and he was willing to pay it. The other thing, I think, the child is not dead, but asleep. And I want to glorify Jesus. Hear this. That's all death is to Jesus. It's like sleep. For us, it's the worst thing that life could throw at us, and for him, it's just asleep. That's how he thinks of it. What kind of power is that? What kind of king is that? Whew. So, they go into the room, right? And this is Peter, James, and John. The family gets to go too. And it's this moment, and there's this little girl who's dead. And after he put them all, everybody else out, put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And the little girl, it's not used anywhere else I can think of. It's warm, affectionate, sweet. It's like honey or sweetie. To me, that's mind-blowing. Because Jesus is about to raise somebody from the dead, and he doesn't roll up his sleeves. He doesn't say, "This is going to be tough." It's like, "Sweetie, it's time to get up." It's like waking your kids up from school in the morning, or trying to wake your kids up from school in the morning. That's all it is to Jesus. His power is on full display. And this is the last verse we'll look at. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. And who wouldn't be? And we were talking about this. It's like the 12 there's like, so the woman, she was bleeding for 12 years, and this little girl was 12 years old. I don't quite know the significance, but one thought that came to us as a teaching team was that, I'm not sure, but after 12 years, both of these women got their lives back. They got life from Jesus. And because every interruption was an invitation, Jesus is 2 for 2. So we look at that story, and the question is, what does that change for you and I? How do we respond? What do we do? So that's the question. How do we respond to the King of Compassion? And here's what I see as 3 responses as we looked at the story together, and I want to invite you to consider what maybe is your next step. Here's the first one that I saw. 1, come out of the shadows. Maybe that's you. Come out of the shadows. Trust Jesus with the first step and let him be the one to make you clean. Trust him. Come out of the shadows. And maybe that's your next step. That's your response to the King of Compassion. I also want to invite you, throw yourself at Jesus' feet. Here's what I mean. Be aware of your needs. See and be aware of your desperate need. Humble yourself. Let go of your pride. Let me ask you this. What good is that doing you? And this is why I think these are so critically important, because when we come out of the shadows towards Jesus, we get to encounter him. When we throw ourselves down at his feet, we see our need and it humbles us. And it's these two soften our hearts. And then we're ready for the interruptions that are invitations. And we respond with compassion for others. That's the heart. Interruptions are invitations for compassion. And so that's what I want to say. When you accept interruptions and invitations, we experience the King of Compassion, and then his love and care for people shines through us, and it changes the lives of the people we encounter forever. And you can be part of that. It can be part of your story and God working through you. And that's what I want to encourage you with today. Take your next step. What we get to do right now is we get to respond to the King of Compassion through communion. He gave his life so that we might have life with him forever. This is the good news. This is why we get together. And we remind ourselves of this, and we worship and elevate Jesus. And so inside this cup, if you didn't get one, you can get one in a moment. But inside is the juice, which represents the blood of Jesus that he shed for us on the cross. And the cracker represents his body that he gave for us. And we get to take this and thank the King of Compassion for his compassion towards us. Let me go ahead and pray, and then let's take this together. Father, thank you. Thank you for being this kind of God. You are a God of compassion. And you love us like no one else can. And you make time for us. And you hear our requests. And you respond to our needs. And you delight to do that. It is your joy and pleasure to do that. How good are you? No one compares. And so today, just help us to see you as you are. And let that soften us. Soften our hearts. And step in and press into the needs of people we encounter. Only you know what each and every one of us needs. And some, maybe they need to come out of the shadows today. They need to humble themselves. They need a healing touch from you. Some need to be more aware of their need. You do what only you can do. Work on our hearts right now, Jesus. And I pray this in your wonderful and powerful name. Amen. Let's take this and thank Jesus for it.